Hello and welcome back to class. I'm Bram Duffee, and today we're going to be talking about interviews. You know, interviews are a fundamental tool in research and data collection, and it offers various approaches to suit different needs and different contexts. And we'll talk about some of these different kinds of interviews today. Things like structured interviews or semi-structured interviews, unstructured interviews. Each of these kinds of interview techniques have different characteristics and applications. And so, first of all, the structured interview is probably what we're most commonly thought of. And the first time I ran into a structured interview that I couldn't stand was when I was interviewing for a job once, because the structured interview that they were giving me as a candidate really didn't allow for me to express myself and show them who I best was, because all of the questions are so structured. And so that's like a script that they had to play. And sometimes that's how things are done in interviewing for positions. And so when you're doing research, we want to think about the same kind of thing can happen. Structured interviews are like following a script. And the interviewer asks a series of questions in the same order for every participant. That kind of approach minimizes the interviewer's influence. So that's good, right? Because that helps us in gathering the consistent and reliable data. But it also has drawbacks. But for example, let's say a company wants to compare candidates for a job position based on performance criteria. And so if you have a structured interview, it's going to ensure that each candidate's evaluated using the same questions. But the downside of that is like how rigid it is, which can sometimes limit the depth of responses, right? So the other hand is the semi-structured interview, and it's like the kind that sort of strikes a balance between the structure and flexibility that might be needed. And so when you do a semi-structured interview, it involves a mix of prepared questions and also the freedom to explore topics that emerge during the conversation. And so that kind of approach allows interviewers to dive deeper into whatever the interesting areas are that come up as they arise. And that provides a richer, more detailed data sometimes. So imagine like a journalist that is covering a human interest story, and they may have some key questions in mind, but what's going to follow the narrative as that interview unfolds is going to be the juice of what is important there. So the main challenge here is maintaining focus while allowing room for exploration. And that all requires skillful navigation by the interviewer. When I'm doing these kinds of interviews, I know that the concern is always time, because if I want to get to particular questions, I may have to limit the time on whatever is being explored. There's also unstructured interviews, and those are the kind of interviews that would be the most flexible. So it's kind of like something that might resemble more of a natural conversation. So there would be like no predetermined set of questions, and that allows the interviewees, the people that are being interviewed, to express themselves freely. This method is really useful when you're doing exploratory research, especially when the goal is to understand whatever the complex behavior is going on or social progress. And it's like I think about anthropology, and when you have an anthropological study, researchers might look at unstructured interviews to be able to help them gain insights on like cultural practices. But this approach can lead to data that's also difficult to analyze, because what do you hold it up next to when it's stands on itself as something that has difficult to compare. So also the data that you get can just really vary in context and scope. So it's difficult to analyze when you have some constraints like that. But across these approaches, it's important to know that building rapport with the person that you're interviewing is crucial. If you do a semi-structured and an unstructured interview, like the whole developing a respectful and trusting relationship is something that can help lead to more authentic and detailed responses. So researchers often ask for permission to record conversations, And that's what's going to allow you to capture for the richness of the dialogue without missing some of the essential details. So it's like, regardless of the approach, the quality of the data that's collected is going to largely depend on the interviewer's ability to listen actively and ask insightful questions, and even think about adapting to the flow of the conversation. So each interviewing style offers unique strengths and challenges like we're talking about, but it impacts not only the data gathering, but the overall research experience. Interviews are a rich source of data that do offer a lot of insights. It depends on how the data is collected and analyzed. And when you have data like this, the process is going to begin with transcription, which involves converting the spoken words from an interview into written text. And this can be done manually or with like transcription software, which definitely speeds up the process. What I do is, when I'm interviewing someone for an article that I'm writing, or if I'm doing research where I'm conducting interviews, I like to use Zoom software, because if I do a Zoom call and I record it, then I can automatically get a transcript of that Zoom interview that Zoom will give me. The difference is that you have to make sure to upload it to the cloud, not to your local computer. So if you upload it to the cloud and you save it through Zoom, then it gives you an automatic transcript, which is phenomenal. So that means that during an interview, I am able to focus just on my time with them and go back. And if I'm trying to take a direct quote or something, I can re-listen to the tape at that, or the recording at that part, and then bounce back into being able to have that full transcript. So whether you do this manually or with the aid of transcription software, it's just advisable to try to do that transcription as soon as you can, so that it's fresh on your mind as the interviewer. Because during the transcription process, we sometimes enter notes to provide context or to highlight important moments. And so that's something that might make the data more valuable later on. Also, what we do is we commonly review that transcript ourselves as the person doing the interview, and then also commonly some research studies have the participant also review that transcript. So there's two people that are looking at that were the two people in the conversation. So those are some things to think about that you might build into your research study. It depends on the importance of the actual words and context. So in terms of sampling, like where you get your research, researchers often use convenience sampling or snowball sampling rather than just random sampling. And I want to talk about some of these differences, because when you're deciding how to pull in information, you have to choose a method. You can't just say anybody, right? And so the thinking behind what you're doing needs to be described. So convenience sampling is something, for example, convenience sampling that involves selecting participants who are easily accessible, right? So that's just convenience, what is accessible. Snowball sampling is a sampling technique that relies on the existing participants to recruit further subjects. So what would happen is, in snowball sampling, let's say that I find a really difficult demographic to reach. And so this specific type of person that I'm trying to reach in this demographic, like age or job or whatever it would be, if I have people that I'm interviewing, then they might be the best people to give me referrals to other people that are in their same category. So that's what snowball sampling is when you're able to identify some people that in a particular demographic, but then those people are just hard to find. So you get your other sources through referrals. So these kinds of sampling techniques are really helpful in qualitative research. And that qualitative research is something that focuses on depth rather than breadth. And I like to say that there are always numbers that can be found in quantitative research, but figuring out why, or understanding why, is the qualitative part. So we can look at a quantitative research study and have results in front of us and still not understand the depth, still not understand the answer to why. So that's where some of these qualitative components can come in, and especially we know that doing interviews are one of the most common ways that research is done in a qualitative format. The goal when you analyze the data that you get from interviews is to be able to think about how that is presented in a way so that the credibility of the researcher is taken into account. So this means that you want to be able to describe the research influence. So that's called reflexivity. So what your awareness of your own influence might be. That's critical because we want to be able to fully understand what information that's coming out of these interviews. So it's you as the interview's perspective is inserted for that purpose, so that the data is understood from that perspective. And so, like, let's say that you were doing a intercultural study and you were a different race and gender from the people that you're interviewing for the study. That would be pertinent because it might change the way the approach or the complex human experience is pulled apart. So the data analysis is a crucial stage where we take these interview transcripts and we can examine them through various methods to uncover meaningful insights. And some of those many approaches involve grounded theory, and it stands out as one of the most popular methods in qualitative analysis. And so it's helpful to understand some of the other techniques that are out there, like content analysis, rhetorical analysis, and the cultural perspective first, so that we can all think about all of these different aspects together. So let's go through a hit list with me so that we can think about some of the different ways that interview data is analyzed. So the first one that I want to mention is content analysis. Content analysis is something that involves systematically coding and categorizing the text data so that you can identify patterns or themes. And it's often used to quantify the qualitative data by transforming it into numerical expressions and provide a straightforward way to interpret the responses' messages. So it's like content analysis is something that would be able to say, they said the word happy 14 times within a 15-minute interview. So that kind of counting is what content analysis might be. Rhetorical analysis, on the other hand, is something that focuses on the understanding of how language and communication techniques affect the audience. So it's something that explores the intent and the impact of the language used. So that can be particularly useful in studies that have to do with persuasion or with media. So it's like if you were conducting an interview and asking a lot of why to understand. Another way that we can conduct interview analysis is through a critical perspective. It's also known as the cultural perspective. And this is something that examines how power or the social constraints or culture influence communication and behavior. And a lot of times that's something that can reveal underlying societal structures to better understand the dynamics. So all of these I wanted to mention so that we could say, okay, some of these are really popular ways that we can analyze the interview data that we get. Now I want to move on to grounded theory, and it's a more complicated area, and it's mentioned in our book. And also, I want to say that this is something that was really put together well in the 60s. So, like it was 1967 that Glasser and House put together this inductive theory, and it's something that is particularly useful when existing theories don't really explain a phenomenon. And grounded theory involves 4 steps: open coding, axial coding, selective coding, and theoretical integration. So let's talk about some of these, and so that we can see how would we use this method. The first thing is open coding. And open coding is the initial step that involves breaking down the data into discrete parts and then examining the similarities and differences. Researchers assign labels or codes to these parts, which helps in identifying initial themes or concepts. So if, for example, if studying a workplace communication, one might code instances of things that you found that were collaborative, or pieces that you found that were of conflict. Right, so after that step, we move on to axial coding. And in this step, we'll take the data and we sort of shift the focus over to finding connections between identified things that you've already coded. So this step organizes the data by linking codes with categories. So it's like creating structure that captures the relationships among the concepts that you have. So this is you doing note-taking to pull together and find these connected areas. The third step after axial coding is selective coding, and at that stage you move on to identify a core category that represents the central phenomenon of what's going on with the study. So during the core category period, it's like refining the connections that you made during an axial coding, where researchers focus on how the main theme integrates with other categories. So, for example, effective communication might emerge as a core category that ties various aspects of workplace interactions together. And so this all seems like, gosh, what a huge amount of work to do to analyze interviews. But when you think about doing 20 interviews, which is a pretty common number of interviews to do, being able to sort that data so that you can remain objective and in your approach, and you can also try to pull insights that that are important for you. This is a method that is helpful. And so to make this work, there's also a theoretical integration step. And that's the final step of integrating the insights and the data into a cohesive theory. This is a process that involves comparing the findings with existing theories and literature, and so it sets you up to situate the new theory within a broader research context. And it also allows researchers to propose new theoretical perspectives or expand on existing ones. So grounded theory is a dynamic and integrative process. You can see we have different steps, we have different ways of processing the information, and so it happens in layers. And we take one step at a time when we have all of the data to go through. And the inductive nature of ground theory makes it especially valuable for understanding complex social processes and also generating new theoretical insights directly from the data. So when you do things like meticulously code and connect the data, this method, which is ground theory, provides a robust framework for building theories that are deeply rooted in empirical evidence. The reason why we're saying that is because the empirical evidence is where it starts. Right? You started from the evidence and grew out from that. So we can see from this method that we have different ways that you could take an interview, and the most complex way would be through this grounded theory analysis. And especially, as I said, when you have a lot of interviews to conduct and you want to be able to be objective and you want to be able to be fair in how you're understanding the data, then this is all stuff that adds to the credibility of the research. Now, we're moving along through the class in a fast pace. I appreciate everyone's hard work on your research assignments. I'll be getting those back to you, and you'll see them the grade sheet uploaded to the gradebook for you. And as we move through with practicing the different methods of research by first looking at surveys and then looking at ethnography, now on to interviewing, I hope that you're able to get a more robust understanding of some of the incredible details that are involved with research and why. Those questions of why are really important. And now that we're more than halfway through the class, I hope that you're able to look at research in a way so that you understand different parts of, like, why would they include this information, and why would they do this particular approach, or how might they research that by asking the question differently. So all of these are fun things to explore and understand. But right now, as we move through our elements on communication research, I want to say that I will see you in the setup for our next section, and appreciate you.